Welcome to the Online Great Books podcast, brought to you by OnlineGreatBooks.com, where we talk about the good life, the great books, great conversation, and great ideas.
Hello, dear listener. Welcome back to the Online Great Books podcast. I am Brett, the producer, and I'm going to start by telling you this is one of my favorite shows of the year, this week and next week. First, Scott and Karl are going to be discussing Lysander Spooner's 1870 essay, No Treason No. 6, The Constitution of No Authority. I have to tell you, usually I wouldn't say anything. I am just supposed to be invisible. But this recording came to me, the producer, with some major audio glitches where the recording skips over parts of Scott. So as the conversation goes on, not only, tragically, are parts of what Scott said missing, but Scott and Karl also become increasingly out of sync. This has been fixed for you in one of the most laborious and inventive editing endeavors I've ever done. And if I've done my job, you really will barely be able to tell that a lot went wrong. And if I could take this spectacular failure of technology and turn it into the almost seamless podcast you're about to listen to, there's no reason why you couldn't get out there and start your own postal service. That's a Lysander Spooner joke. If you don't get it, stay tuned. It will all make sense at the end of this hour. Really, the reason why I went into all of that is to make this show work, I had to remove some parts of Scott from the recording. Sometimes it was just a word, sometimes it was just a clause, and one time, unfortunately, it had to be a whole short story. So the only thing you should notice is maybe like a jumpiness here and there, but this is such a great conversation, and I'm so proud to be a part of it. Thank you for your time and attention, and here is Scott and Karl.
I'm Scott Hambrick.
I'm Karl Shute.
And today, I'm not going to say on the Online Great Books podcast anymore, because Brett always does this intro, and he says, welcome to the Online Great Books podcast, and today Karl and Scott are blah, 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 blah. And then he cuts to us, and then I say it all over. So I'm not going to do that anymore. So,
oh, no.
Do you
Change.
listen? You would know that.
If I listen to the show?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know Brett always does wonderful work, but
Yeah, so
then I'd have to listen to me.
Yeah, it's pretty good. I'm a fan of you. Today we are going to discuss Lysander Spooner, The Constitution of No Authority, published by the author, Boston, 1870.
It's a lot of fun.
It's going to be hard for Karl, I think.
Why is that?
You want to maintain your affect. Don't want to show your power level. You know. Right?
Okay. In some circles, we speak of normies. This book is a shot across the bow of normies.
Yeah.
You read it and you're like, oh, crap. Everything I thought was true isn't true. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. So who was this guy?
He was an abolitionist attorney from the Northeast. You know, when you read this, he's kind of a fire and brimstone kind of preacher man, isn't he?
Mm-hmm.
You know, Northeast firebrand political rhetorician. And he's an anarchist. Karl has tripped on to Lysander Spooner here at the ripe old age of, 60? How old?
You asking about me?
Yeah.
How dare you, sir? I am 50.
Oh, 50. Well, Hambrick found Spooner in a zine when he was 18 years old.
60.
That's yeah. You're Generation X, but I found this when I was 18 years old. Imagine what Spooner would do to an 18-year-old.
I can see it right in the Zoom window here.
Yeah.
We could do a little more in his life in a minute, but just for the fire and brimstone, here is the first sentence of the essay. The Constitution has no inherent authority or obligation. Period.
Yep.
That's a good first sentence. You know, I used to read student essays, and it would always start with just boilerplate garbage. There are many causes for the adoption of the Constitution, you know, just that standard stuff. And they would, if they bury the lead. If they had a thesis statement, you have to dig for it. Well, here's the thesis statement right here. I love it. It's perfect writing. It's fiery. You have no doubt what he thinks. And we'll get into that in a minute. So he was from Massachusetts. He's an abolitionist. However, he was opposed to the Civil War, which is real interesting.
It's the only rational approach to be an abolitionist and against the Civil War.
Yeah, Scott and I are reading, well, at least the first volume of Shelby Foote's Civil War narrative. And I mean, I'm reading this thing and it's like a slow motion train wreck
Oh my
to
Lord.
me.
Yeah.
How could people be so stupid as to engage in this sort of thing? And yet they do.
It's one of the worst things in the last 300 years.
It's pretty bad. But we're going to talk about it. It's a wonderful book, but it's a pretty bad thing it's about. I love that he set up his own postal company to test whether the United States' government monopoly on delivering the mail would stand up to a court challenge. And of course it did. He lost, but he tried. You know, it's against the law for anyone else to deliver mail to you. You might not know that, but Federal Express, FedEx, and UPS, and whoever else is out there, DHL, they're not allowed to do that. They can do packages, but they can't just deliver you mail.
That's why they do the parcel service instead of licking a stamp and handing it to the man in brown.
Yeah, because the feds won't let you do that.
Spooner tried. You know, he's an anarchist and painted, frankly, by public school textbooks as the people in the Haymarket bombing and, bomb throwing, the Black Hand, violent revolutionaries. And it doesn't have to be that way. The violent revolutionary, I don't know, approach to political change, that doesn't necessarily go hand in hand with our anarchism.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean anarchism doesn't, in its best form, in the Spooner form, doesn't mean no rules, free for all. It means organic rules for him, that because he's a big natural law guy. It means organic laws and no overarching ruler. Yeah. Now, I think he's full of shit, but I admire him so much. He makes his arguments so well. And he was so principled. Like you said, he set up his own post office. He wrote a book, Plan for the Abolition of Slavery, where he says that individual people who were abolitionists should engage in guerrilla raids on individual people who held slaves. Now, that sounds pretty crazy, but would you rather have a fire team of 4 abolitionists go and free a single farm, single plantation that held slaves? Like maybe there are 50 slaves on a single farm. Would you rather have John Brown's fire team come in there and free those people, or do you want to just blanda? We're trained to think that if civilians or regular people use force in that way, that it's categorically bad. Like there's no way that could be just or good or proper. He conspired with John Brown, who I hate, and he participated in an aborted plan to free Brown. He raided Harper's Ferry Arsenal. A really interesting guy. A distributist too, Karl.
The problem with... Yeah, I know. The problem I'm going to have is who enforces the anarchy? That sounds like a silly question, but hanging around on the internet and in real life with people who think they're libertarians. Okay? All right, fine. I have some of the same temptations. I get it. Who enforces the liberty? Because if you don't enforce the liberty, you're not going to have liberty. And that seems like a contradiction. Well, nobody enforces it because it's liberty. If you enforce it, it's not liberty. But if you don't enforce it, you won't have it.
Okay, you're going to have to delve into that more, because that's a slippery thing that the libertarians... Liberty isn't a positive thing.
Okay.
Well, it's not. It's the absence of coercion. It's like evil's the privation of the good. Liberty is the privation of coercion.
Okay.
So how do you have liberty?
You have people leave you alone.
Right, but how do you do that?
How do you have people leave you alone?
Yeah.
It ends up you have to have a bunch of people with weapons standing at your borders saying, leave us alone.
Right. So Spooner, you read the first sentence, the Constitution has no inherent authority or obligation. And I got to thinking about this a great deal. This is my 11th reading of this, and I've changed a lot since the first time I read it. No government has any inherent authority or obligation. No government does, except that which the force that the government can wield obtains it.
Yeah.
You're born, and you're a subject of that government, period. Nobody asked you if you wanted to be. I mean, that's how it works. And the anarchist says, well, we don't need that. But that's the way of it. If his guerrilla abolitionist fire teams get to be effective enough, they will develop a militia. And eventually, you end up at feudalism every time. And then it progresses from there to some, but whatever. That's not in the book.
Yeah. I have up the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution. And so the Declaration of Independence says that after the bit about the unalienable rights, which is nice, it'd be nice if that were true, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. All right. Governments, says the Declaration, get their powers from the consent of the governed. Does that actually happen? What does that consent look like? The U.S. Constitution doesn't say anything about consent of the governed. It says, we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, etc., do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. So they don't say, you will consent to this. They ordain and establish. What does it mean to ordain and establish? It means this is it.
I have to deuce on the Declaration of Independence. If the Constitution has no authority, Declaration of Independence positively does not have any authority. It is not a governing document of this country. I blame that on 7 years ago, and he quotes the Declaration of Independence. He did not derive his political power or his role, or the federal government's role did not derive its power or its roles from the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence is simply what it was. I'm tired of it being an appendix to the Constitution, which is dubious anyway. So there.
I would say the Declaration is it is not the governing document. It is the way I would put it. It's the founding document. Before it, if it does anything, before it, there's no United States of America. Afterwards, there is. Oh gosh, I forget the guy's name. There's a guy that wrote a book about the way we use language. I think it starts with an S. I'd have to dig it up. That sometimes when you use language, it's not always indicative. It's not always interrogative. You're not always asking questions or making statements or giving commands. Sometimes you're doing things. So he has this category of performatives. So when you go into the church to say marriage vows, there is something that exists after you say it that didn't exist before you said it. That's what I take the Declaration to have been.
Well, who said it?
A performative kind of utterance. Well, who said it? The people who signed it in Independence Hall in Philadelphia in 1776.
Right. Yeah. So now we're back to Spooner.
Yeah.
The Constitution has no inherent authority or obligation. It has no authority or obligation at all unless it's a contract between man and man. And it does not so much as even purport to be a contract between persons now existing.
Well, it doesn't even say it's a contract.
No.
I think he's wrong there. It says we ordain and establish. It doesn't say, everybody who comes after us will agree to this.
True.
It doesn't care if we agree. How could it? So he says, this is the part in italics, and the Constitution, so far as it was their contract, talking about the people who signed it, died with them. They have no natural power or right to make it obligatory on their children. So if it's a contract, there's a thing in philosophy called social contract theory, which attempts to figure out this problem. You know, you are living in a government that you didn't agree to. Okay? Nobody ever asked you. That strikes some people as unfair. Or it seems unfair. You know, if I suddenly find myself in a contract to buy pork bellies, and I say, wait a minute, I never signed that contract, and then I have to take delivery on a bunch of pork bellies or sell them to somebody else, but I never got into the contract. You'd think that was unfair, right? So here I am living in a state which has a government that I had no part in founding. So it seems like sorry, Heidegger's coming up. It seems to me like I've been thrown into a situation not of my choosing. How do we justify this? Well, you have philosophers who attempt to figure out why this would be the case, and that you actually did agree, only you agreed. I mean, we can just deem it that you agreed, because you would have agreed if you were there. And this is social contract. This is Rousseau. This is Hobbes. This is Locke. It's later on, it's Rawls. You know, we can presume that you would have agreed to this thing.
You know, in the Constitution, he mentions this here, that it says they had no natural power or right to make it obligatory upon their children. But in the Constitution, it says that, you know, they establish that government because you say it's performative, right? With the act of writing the thing and the framers signing it, they have created a corporation.
Mm-hmm.
And it says in the Constitution that corporation was created for the benefit of their posterity. So I'm no attorney, Spooner is. Having that created for the benefit of the posterity jives. I bought some land for the benefit of my posterity. They created a corporation for the benefit of the posterity. That jives. What obligation does the posterity then have to the corporation?
Well, they have to, you know, follow the Constitution forever and ever, always.
Forever and ever, always.
Yeah, that's the problem. That's where you're like, wait a minute, I didn't sign this. And this is not to say, you know, I mean, there's bits in the Constitution I like. I think it's largely failed, but this isn't for me reading Spooner. It's not that, oh, freedom of the press is wrong. It's that this document purports to be binding on people that were not there when it was signed. You know, I mean, there's laws. There's laws on the books. I have to drive on the right side of the road. I can't have a livery stable on my property here in Illinois. I can't have chickens here. There's all sorts of laws that I have to follow that I never agreed to. So the nature of government is going to be, and if I violate them, what happens to me?
They'll point a gun at you and put you in a cage. Ultimately.
Right. So the basis of law is the threat of violence. It's not that I think it's right that I can't have a chicken coop on my little quarter acre here. This is where the myth of the founding that, you know, we all agreed and that we still all agree. Well, do we still all agree? He says, this is on page 5.
Oh, good. Moving right along.
So there's 2 paragraphs here that I like right in the middle. So when a man says he's planting a tree for himself and his posterity, he does not mean to be understood as saying that he has any thought of compelling them, nor is it to be inferred that he is such a simpleton as to imagine that he has any right or power to compel them to eat the fruit. So far as they are concerned, he only means to say that his hopes and motives in planting the tree are that its fruit may be agreeable to them. So yeah, I'm looking at buying some fruit trees and planting them for me, but as Scott says, I'm very old, for my posterity, but I'm not going to bind them to eat the fruit. Can I even do that? Can I say, you must tend this orchard for the rest of creation?
The best thing to do would be to create an orchard of such eminent value that they would cherish it and maintain it. And want to pass that on to their own posterity. That's the anarchist way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now let's do the devil's advocate here. Okay. Let's stay on the orchard example. If there's no binding power, there's not going to be any orchards. Because the next kid is going to say, I don't want to do this. Or it's going to be cold and chop it all down for firewood or do something else stupid. And you won't have any orchards.
Yeah. I made a note here right on the first page where he says they had no natural power or right to make it obligatory upon their children. And I wrote here that a monarchy has more power in this way. Our Constitution is supposedly derived from the consent of the governed, but yet we actually never are able to give the consent. Now, somebody listening right now is yelling, we get to vote. He addresses it. Spooner addresses all of these tacit ways that people say that we consent to be governed, paying taxes, voting, etc. He addresses that, and I think he deals with them pretty tidily. We'll get there. There is no way, short of signing the contract for Spooner, that would allow for consent to this Constitution. I agree with him. But that's not how it works. Period. You are born here. You are a subject to this government. The government is here to provide certain goods, services to you. And that government has its being in a person who you can kill if you need to. Is metaphysically much more clean than the whole lie that this is a government by the consent of the people. So there.
Government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. Right.
At this point, who in fact are the people?
I don't know.
Somebody that shows up.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole of this point is so broken.
So I want to read the next paragraph on 5. So it was with those who originally adopted the Constitution. Whatever may have been their personal intentions, the legal meaning of their language, so far as their posterity was concerned, simply was that their hopes and motives in entering into the agreement were that it might prove useful and acceptable to their posterity, that it might promote their union, safety, tranquility, and welfare, that it might tend to secure to them the blessings of liberty. The language does not assert, I think it might actually, so I have a disagreement, that word ordain and establish, I think does assert. But he says the language does not assert or at all imply any right, power, or disposition on the part of the original parties to the agreement to compel their posterity to live under it. If they had intended to bind their posterity to live under it, they should have said that their object was not to secure them the blessings of liberty, but to make slaves of them. For if their posterity are bound to live under it, they are nothing less than the slaves of their foolish, tyrannical, and dead grandfathers. And I'm laughing because I love the strength of the rhetoric, the no punches pulled.
Famously, Jefferson held the view that the tree of liberty had to be watered with blood or whatever, and he said that they probably should scramble the whole thing, build it every 20 or so years. That's what he's talking about. The grandfather has no right to bind posterity in this way. And if there was some sort of a peaceful revolution, he says water the tree of liberty with blood, but if there's some way to scramble it and rebuild it every 20 years, that solves that problem. And I think that's part of what Jefferson was getting at. I think he probably also wanted each successive generation to earn the thing.
I think the Constitution itself does mean to bind posterity. And I have right here, Section 9, Article 1, the migration or importation of such persons as any of the states now existing shall think proper to admit shall not be prohibited by Congress prior to the year 1808. Okay, so the slave trade can't be restricted before 1808. But after that, presumably it could. But it's got a time written into the Constitution. So it's this 1787 when it's ratified, right? And then, so it's already got a temporal bound on it of behavior that it's mandating. So it's future oriented. Yeah, it's hard rhetoric. Is it true? Is this the nature? Dear listener, have you given consent to the Constitution? In what way did you give that consent? Is it because you haven't moved away?
I remember finding out at some point, I was probably maybe 12, 18-year-olds could vote. And you had to go register to vote and all that stuff, And I remember, and I think I asked someone, do you sign the Constitution? Like, is there a big book that everybody, you go register to vote, you sign it, and whatever. I remember thinking that and asking that of, my Mrs. McCowan, my poor teacher.
Oh, gosh. Can you imagine being Hambrick's teacher?
Oh, gosh. She was such a dunce. Poor thing. She was just trying to get her check,
At the Catoosa Penitentiary.
Minimum security, poor children detention facility. I said one time on the Barbell Logic podcast that public schools were, what did I say? I said they were like warehouses for poor kids until they could be tried as adults. I got so much hate mail for that. I stand by it. Yeah, but he says here that if the posterity has bound itself to the Constitution, it could only have done so in two ways, voting or paying taxes. But Karl just said is sticking around, staying, not leaving. Is that consent? He doesn't really address that one that much. I don't think he addresses that one, does he?
Yeah. I mean, that's the argument that Socrates makes in Crito, when his buddies want to have him escape. And they've got it all set up. Probably the Assembly of Athens wanted him to escape. But he won't do it. And he says, he has the laws of Athens come and talk to him. And he says, at any point did you find us burdensome? Did you ever leave when you could have left? You didn't. So you agreed to be subject to us.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that Socrates' argument carries some heft and meaning. It's a principled stand. I don't know that I could do that. Socrates could put his spare toga in a sack, walk out of Athens, and not be in that government later that day.
Yeah. He could just start walking.
Yes.
Although togas are Roman, not Greek.
Well, you know what I'm saying. Hey, you're shitting on my jokes like Reynolds.
Actually.
He would have had to leave the city-state, not his nation. He could walk a day, still speak his native tongue, have no significant cultural impact on him. I mean, it's a city-state. It's a city, for crying out loud. Where the hell do you go, Karl, if you're like, this is intolerable to me, this United States government, and I'm shagging out because I do not consent? Okay, now what?
Now what? So we have a country to our north, a country to our south. Immigration is restricted to both. It's hard to immigrate into Mexico. It can be done, but it's hard. There's property requirements. They test you. They do all sorts of things. And you can't get into Canada. Continuing to live a place be a token of consent requires, it seems to me, that leaving is easy. If there's a substantial burden to leaving, then you staying is not a mark of consent. You staying is saying, this isn't yet so intolerable that I'm going to sneak into Ontario and brave the Mounties. I think I'd go to Saskatchewan anyway, with an axe and carve out a log cabin somewhere. But anyway, that is an argument that's made that Spooner doesn't deal with, which is that just continuing to live in a place means consent.
Well, and that's the dumb people argument, right? Like, I'm like, taxes are too high, this foreign policy is terrible, and whatever. And people are like, well, why don't you just leave? Like, if it's so bad, why don't you just leave?
Nobody can just leave.
Because you can't just leave. If you leave and you try to pull your wealth out, they tax it all into oblivion. You can't escape with any wealth from the United States. That's just a stupid argument. It's just stupid. And if you did go, the tyranny of moving to Singapore and not being able to speak the language and having all the differences and the confusion, that's its own kind of oppression. It is. So you have math, right? Like, do I want to move to Belize and get a tapeworm, struggle with Spanish at age 47, and also, have none of my net worth here because the government seized it as I was heading out to do my passport up on the roof? It doesn't work like that. The game is set up so that you can't give up the citizenship.
Oh, that's interesting. The game. So I was just thinking before you said that, this might work if you were free to go wherever you wanted to, and you didn't have exit taxes. Like some of the states want to do exit taxes so that you can't move out without paying a penalty. So why is it then that states do not have sort of a free market of immigration? Why can't you just go wherever you want? Why did East Germany not let you go into West Germany? I mean, before the wall came down, why can't you just let people leave?
No, because they will. Like if East Germany,
because they will leave,
right? East Germany would be empty. It would be like tumbleweeds and crickets if they didn't have the wall in 55. When did they build that damn thing? Something like that.
Oh, I don't know. It's been down longer than it was up. We went there. My family, we went there because it's ancestral lands. Shortly after the wall came down, it was kind of a Wild West place when it opened up. We took a cab ride with a Russian cab driver in East Berlin, and we didn't speak Russian. I don't even think he spoke German. He didn't speak English
or German.
We managed to tell him where we wanted to go, driving this little Trabant or something, this little 2-cycle engine car. It was interesting. But you cross the border and like the paint just loses 3 shades of color.
Yep.
But nobody would have stayed there. The restrictions on immigration or emigration, which every country has, every single country on the planet has this. Doesn't that just say they know that their citizens don't consent?
Yeah.
Isn't that the proof?
Seems like. This is not Spoonerific. Spooner says, the act of voting could bind no one but the actual voters. But owing to the qualifications required, it is probable that, during the first 20, 30 years under the Constitution, not more than 1/10, 15th, or perhaps 20th, the whole population, black and white, men, women, and minors, were permitted to vote. Consequently, so far as voting was concerned, not more than 1/10, 15th, or 20th of those then existing could have incurred any obligation to support the Constitution.
Yeah, that's probably true.
So he has a lot about voting as a consent to the Constitution. Argument 1 is not enough people can vote for the Constitution to have widespread adoption.
Mm-hmm.
Midwit listener right now is saying, well, women can vote, and people that don't own land. Well, children are being born into this government, 0 say in it, and they can't vote till they're 18. That's proper. I don't want my children who still won't eat steak and prefer chicken nuggets voting. So what do you do about the argument that voting is consent to the governed, to be governed? It's bogus. It's bogus. It doesn't fly when the rubber hits the road. So if you were to say, well, let's broaden the franchise in order to broaden the Constitution's authority. Well, point 2 on page 7, of the 1/6 that are permitted to vote, probably not more than 2/3 have usually voted. Many never vote at all. Many vote only once in 2, 3, 5, or 10 years in periods of great excitement. No one by voting can be said to pledge himself for any longer period than that for which he votes. If, for example, I vote for an officer is to hold his office for 1 year, I cannot be said to have thereby pledged myself to support the government beyond that term. What do you think of that, Karl?
Yeah, he's a contractualist. It's if it's not a contract, it's nothing. But that's not the nature of government, which is kind of what he's pointing out. But, not everybody votes. So once again, this is the same as my argument why every country has restrictions on entering and leaving. And some of them actually enforce them. Well, some of them actually enforce the restrictions that are on the books, like Mexico. If you only have 35% of the population voting, if you were going to say that voting betokens consent, then what percentage of your people consent?
Well, he says no more than 35%, but probably less. Most of them don't actually vote.
Yeah.
And then he goes on to say that even if they do vote, their consent doesn't extend beyond the term for which they are voting. So if you're voting for a president who is voting him in for a 4-year term, that's as long as you consent to deal with that executive branch. Later on, he says, it cannot be said by voting that a man pledges himself to support the Constitution unless the act of voting be perfectly voluntary on his part. Here he goes on to say that really voting is coerced. That might be a pill for somebody to swallow.
He finds, this is top of page 8, and he finds himself without his consent so situated that if he use the ballot, he may become a master. If he does not use it, he must become a slave. So why do you vote? Self-defense, you vote in order that you not be ruled by the worst of people. Is that really consent? If I vote for Cook County Commissioner for the guy that I think is less bad, it's like, here's your dinner. This is all you may have. You may either have a plate of bovine excrement or a plate of equine excrement. And you end up eating one of them because you have to. Have you consented to eating bullshit? I don't know that that's consent.
I felt this very, very keenly when I was 18 and I went to the office and registered for selective service. At that point, I'm like, man, I have got to go vote. I was going to go vote and make sure that the non-neocon got the vote because I was not interested in getting drafted and going to save some place somewhere for democracy. I wasn't interested in voting really for anybody that I have ever voted for, but I felt it really keenly at that time. Like, I want to vote to minimize the chances of a foreign war so that I'm not conscripted to go fight in some damn conflict that I have no interest in.
Yeah, this consent argument can be made very vivid when you think about that every male at the age of 18 in this country, I think they might be having the women sign up now, which is just great, has to get into a database in order that he may be deprived of his liberty and sent to die. And it hasn't happened for a while, and so people forget the coercive power of government. But it happened up until 1975. I remember the neighbor family had the gold star in the window when the government came and took their kid and killed him, or didn't kill him, but sent him off where he would be killed. I am old, Scott. I remember vaguely the Vietnam War. I know you're a young kid. You don't remember that. But, people worried about getting drafted.
My first one was the Falklands, Yeah, I mean, I was 18. I went down and registered to vote because you have to. Maybe you don't. Right? But if you wanted to go to a state university, you had to. I mean, at that time, there were...
Register for the draft, you mean?
Yes, selective service, yeah.
Yeah.
At that time, there were things that would be closed off to you if you didn't register. And I went and registered. And on top of that, I was 18. I wasn't necessarily aware of ways in which I could get around things. I don't even know what they were, but I wasn't aware of any. Because I promise you, I probably went to school 40 days my senior year. Like if I could have found a way to play hooky from selective service, I would have done it. So I go and sign up for that, and you could bet your ass I was going to go vote for the least saber-rattling son of a bitch I could vote for.
Mm-hmm. Well, that means you consent to everything.
Right, everything.
Because you voted.
Now I'm in. Again, some nitwit is saying, oh, well, you wanted to go to a state university. That system is so coerced and manipulated by the government, you don't really have a choice. Private universities have been priced out of that price point. The sort of moderately priced tuition that you could get at a in-state university in 1992. Why would any private university try to operate at that point when there were, in the measly state of Oklahoma, there were probably 12 state universities at that price point? Not to mention all of the other land-grant universities in the whole United States. They've ruined the college market to that point, so I had no choice. I was just a lower middle-class kid with a car and no money. What's it going to do?
Not go.
Right, not go.
Yeah, so let's take this argument further. Okay, so let's say you decide to not go. When you leave the palatial Hambrick estate in Catoosa, how do you leave it?
Yeah, right. Yeah. For you,
you get in your car, right?
For you midwits, don't focus on my university example. You've got the roads. Where are you going to get your water? We've already talked about Spooner and his postal experiment. Like, you can't do a fucking thing.
Yeah, whose roads are you driving on? You know, we have back when I could go to museums, there is one in, I believe it's in Joliet, Illinois, a town. I kind of like Joliet, but it used to be a steel town. It's not anymore. But it has a museum for the Lincoln Highway. Okay, the Lincoln Highway runs from coast to coast. It was privately made. The guy, I forget the guy's name, but the guy who made it, he just went and got right-of-ways and put them all together and made a road by himself. Well, they don't let you do that. You can't do that. There's no private roads except maybe on your property, but even then there's easements and everything else. You have to. There's no way you cannot consent.
Yeah, it's overarching.
Pretty soon the air that you breathe will be government air.
In a lot of places, the water you drink is. You can't build a pond. You can't drill a well on your own property in lots of places in the United States. So they're doing it to the water.
Mm-hmm.
The USDA makes sure that you can't buy certain kinds of food. There are lots of places in the United States where a farmer is not allowed to cow, put that milk in a container and hand it to you in exchange for. You consented to that, bro. You consented to that.
Yeah. Well, because you still live here.
Right.
You know, you consented.
Well, you voted, right? You voted for Perot back then, remember? Like, this is... Did you vote for Perot?
What is the guy you vote? We have a secret ballot in these United States.
So that's a yes. Okay. 4. As taxation is made compulsory on all, whether they vote or not, a large proportion of those who vote no doubt do so to prevent their own money being used against themselves, when in fact they would have gladly abstained from voting, if they could have thereby saved themselves from taxation alone, to say nothing of being saved from all the other usurpations and tyrannies of the government. So there you go. There's that argument. Famously, didn't want to pay any taxes because he knew that that some of those tax money would be used to fund the war against Mexico. And he went to jail and wrote his letter, his epistle from prison there, or jail, and some of his do-gooder hand-wringing friends paid those taxes on his behalf, and he was let out of jail. And I think that if it had been up to Thoreau, he would have done the Socrates. He'd have rotted there. He would have rotted there. I am pretty sure. I used to make some money, Karl. Back before I got in the, big book, like the great books racket, used to make some money. I'm pretty sure I've bought a cruise missile from back when I paid taxes.
You should go claim it.
Bring my receipt and ask for it. I'll take my trailer. the thing
Just
is,
go up to Fort Lawton or Fort Sill. Go to Fort Sill and say, "I'm here for my missile."
I'm here for my cruise missile, y'all.
Pardon me?
They're like, oh, we killed 1,367 brown people with that. Wonk, wonk.
Well, you consented to that.
I consented to that. 5. At nearly all elections, votes are given for various candidates for the same office. Those for the unsuccessful candidates cannot properly be said to have voted to sustain the Constitution. They may, with more reason, be supposed to have voted not to support the Constitution, but specifically to prevent the tyranny which they anticipated the successful candidate intends to practice upon them under color of the Constitution, and therefore may be reasonably supposed to have voted against the Constitution itself. I think this is one of the most interesting arguments in the thing. He is essentially saying, if you voted for somebody else, your guy loses. Or God forbid, your woman loses. If voting means anything, and you voted for somebody who lost, your vote is a declaration of non-consent to be governed. Like, we see a sort of soft-headed iteration of this, like, not my president. You know, we see that, right? Louder and more shrill. But there's something to that.
You saw concrete examples of people withholding their consent when a recent president was elected and tried to do things, and it wouldn't happen because the rest of the government just chose not to do it.
Well, Karl, that's because of the exquisitely balanced checks and balances between the three branches and...
No, this was executive branch people just choosing not to do the thing that they were ordered to do.
That's right.
That absolutely happened. We were supposed to... An order was given to withdraw U.S. forces from Syria, and said executive was lied to and told that it had happened and it hadn't.
Yep. You know, I was
because they didn't like the order.
I was very excited about Obama. I just let that hang there a little bit, let that soak in. I didn't vote for him, but, you know, I thought at least this son of a bitch has stated that he wants to get us out of all these conflicts. Actually, and he didn't do it.
Nope.
Trump promised the same. I was excited about that. He wasn't able to do it. Biden didn't promise us, and we got out of Afghanistan of sorts. But I don't know what the game is. Like, so if I'm voting and they're promising these things, like, what's the game? What is my vote consenting to? What am I purchasing with the vote? What's going on? I don't know, man. The listener kind of knows the circles I ran around with. They weren't very excited about Obama, but I was like, oh, it's more of the same. He was already a senator. You know, he already had a pretty decent chunk of power, and at least he wants to get us out of these conflicts, unlike that, you know, that one family. So, didn't happen.
No, it didn't happen. I was not excited about him, but I had a friend who was, for the money, the same reasons. Yeah, I had a friend who's a friend of note in certain circles, PhD scholar kind of a guy, and he was very excited about Obama, and then just for that reason. And then 8 years later, you won't believe this is possible, he was very excited about Trump for the same reasons. Because they wanted to get out of wars. He didn't want to go to war with Russia.
The younger Bush pledged to privatize Social Security, et cetera, et cetera. He got elected. Before his first year was over, he expanded Medicare.
You consented to that.
Right. So what is the vote?
Everything.
Oh,
I don't know. If there's this quote attributed to Mark Twain, if voting were important, they wouldn't let us do it.
Yeah.
If voting mattered, they wouldn't let us do it. I don't know what voting is. I think, how about this? Voting is a way to manufacture consent.
I think that's right.
It's not a way to direct government.
I think, you know, manufacture consent, yes. But I also think, in addition to that, it is a way to bloody and dirty your hand.
Sure.
This president's conflict and killed all those brown people with the cruise missile that they forced Hambrick to pay for, and you voted for him, so you're part of it. You know, it's like in the mob where everybody has to shoot the guy.
Yeah, so in the monarchy, it's the king's navy
That's right.
that does things. His Majesty's ship. In the alleged democracy, it's our navy that does it, which is different.
6, many votes are usually given for candidates who have no prospect of success. Those who give such reasonably be supposed to have voted as they did with a special intention not to support but to obstruct the execution of the Constitution. I think a lot of us have made spoiler
Did you vote for
votes.
Kanye?
Well, that's why I ask about Perot. You know, Yeezy, whatever.
He got a lot of votes.
Yeah. I may have voted for Kanye once. I don't know. But if you vote for a spoiler, that could be a signification of non-consent. 7, as all different votes are given secretly by secret ballot, there is no legal means of knowing from the votes themselves who votes for and who votes against the Constitution. Therefore, voting affords no legal evidence that any particular individual supports the Constitution. This argument was a little rattling to me. He impeaches the secret ballot.
Yes, he does not like the secret ballot. He would not like anons on Twitter.
No. He's for face fagging. I'm
He's no
really
friend
prickly
of
today.
Of the frogs.
Super prickly today.
I don't know about that. Well, what is the secret ballot for? Probably the purpose of it is so that you can plausibly deny that you consented to something. You know, so John Brown comes into town in Missouri and he wants to kill everybody who voted for the secessionists. Well, if the voter rolls are public, now he can find out that, you know, Joe and Sally Mae, that their household voted for the secessionists, and he can go kill them all.
Right. And that makes sense, right? All the normies are like, yeah, of course we have to have it. Well, what happens when people start voting to kill other people? What happens when people start voting to seize all of your wealth? What happens when people start voting to otherwise, you know, violate your person? They can operate as a secret gang. I think he calls them a mafia in here at some point.
Mm-hmm.
So it cuts both ways. That people can act in political ways with no repercussion. Like that's a really good thing if they're in pursuit of the true good. If they're not in the pursuit of the true good, that's a really bad thing.
Yeah, gangs wear masks for reasons. You know, they don't want to be identified. They don't want to be responsible for their actions. You know, you could vote for the stupidest things in the world that give you personal benefit, which you wouldn't do if, you know, they find that in polling. The difference in polling, when somebody calls you on the phone and says, are you going to support candidate X? And you say, gosh, no, I would never do that. And of course you support candidate X, but you're not going to tell the pollster because you're afraid of what will happen to you if you do. I'm not ready to give up the secret ballot because I think the gangs would find me. Yep. Yeah, we've seen the escalation of violence in politics where they just want to know who you are, and people show up at your house and do bad things to you.
Well, maybe they don't even do that. Maybe they just call your boss and just like jam the switchboard, and your boss shit cans you because he's trying to do business and you're a problem. You know, I mean, the whole cancellation thing. Yeah, I'm still for the secret ballot, but I've never really heard, before Spooner, I had never heard anybody say, hey, that anonymity cuts both ways. And he's right. It does. I think the benefit of keeping the secret ballot outweighs those negatives, but he's not wrong about it.
Would government be worse or better if you had, let's say, you couldn't just vote on a secret ballot. Let's say you had to go to your town hall and you had to pick up a black marble or a red marble and drop it in the bin, and everybody saw you. Or everybody could potentially see you. I mean, it'd be a shocking thing to switch, and I'd be worried, but would you get better government if the voting had to be public?
I think there's a good chance that you would. I know people, and you probably know people, listener, who live very decent and responsible lives. They save their money. They encourage their children to be frugal and to not be impulsive, and are very conservative in their ways. And then they will vote for absolutely outrageous things. Think of any, left political family. They get married, they stay married, they try to make money, they do business, they have kids, and any of their degeneracy or libertine ways are at least hidden, So there are people that live in a very conservative, cautious way and then don't vote that way. And I think that getting rid of a secret ballot would make their votes to be more consonant with the way they live because of the pressures on them in business, in public life.
Then again, they might also just vote. What better way to virtue signal than to vote the way that all of the cool people are voting? So you could be in the club.
Yeah, maybe.
This is the first time I've seen somebody argue against the secret ballot. I'm not sure I want to go with him on this.
I've got some friends make a whole bunch of money, own some businesses, own some real estate, married, got a bunch of kids, and don't want the kids drinking, doing drugs, no criminality. They want them to be upstanding people and trying to get their kids to live the same way and grow up the same way with the same sorts of values that somebody would have had in their position in the 1930s, essentially. This is the same argument where people of the left say that rural people vote against their interests when they vote for, let's say, they vote for Trump. This is what a lot of urban people say about rural people or poor people when they vote for Trump. I actually, the midwit is saying that to me. I don't think that's true. I think the urban person doesn't understand the rural person's interest. They think that the rural person's interest is strictly to make more money and to be like the urban person, but that's not true. Now, this friend I'm talking about, I know what their interest is. And I know a lot of those kinds of people, and then they vote in a different way. And it seems to me like maybe if all of their client base knew that they voted like that it might change. Because remember, we're talking Tulsa, Oklahoma here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
You're not talking Cook County. All right, I want to read a bit because I love the rhetoric. Dear listener, if you find his ideas repugnant, maybe, fine, okay, but it's still super fun to read. Because there are so many people who are mealy-mouthed. There's an old expression. You can't pin them. It's like pinning Jello to a wall. You can't figure out what exactly they say or what exactly they mean. No doubt with Lysander Spooner. So in number 10 here, he tells you, it's glorious. It's funny. When you argue with somebody like this, even if you think he's wrong, it's like you're just so happy that he actually gave you a target and told you exactly what he thinks. It's refreshing. I love it. As all voting is secret by secret ballot, and as all secret governments are necessarily only secret bands of robbers, tyrants, and murderers, the general fact that our government is practically carried on by means of such voting only proves that there is among us a secret band of robbers, tyrants, and murderers whose purpose is to rob, enslave, and so far as necessary to accomplish their purposes, murder the rest of the people. I love that. I'm not sure of his premise. The necessary. Secret governments are necessarily only. That's the point where I think that's a little strong.
That's a little strong. Governments are more free to do those things, I think, than one that would be exposed to the sanitizing light of day.
Mm-hmm.
So this seems pretty fiery, right? He just saw the federal government destroy half of the country.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you're old like me, you remember when tens of thousands, I forget the exact number, hundreds of thousands of people were conscripted to go to Southeast Asia. So rob, enslave, and murder, it's not necessarily a stretch. Imagine your boys, your young men in your family. I got two. Imagine the government man shows up and says, I'm taking your son.
Oh, for ice cream?
This isn't, no, I'm going to take him and put him through basic training and teach him. Well, he might learn electricianing, but he's mostly going to learn to shoot a rifle and follow orders. No, there will be people shooting back at him in the Crimea or Taiwan Straits or somewhere, wherever the next war is. I don't think you understand. We're taking him. And then the guns come out. The government you voted for, the government you consented to. You are, after all, a citizen of the United States, are you not? Strong rhetoric, secret bands of robbers, tyrants, and murderers. Where's the lie? You know? Maybe they're not always robbers, tyrants, and murderers, but they could be. Yeah, they could be. So if you are a supporter of the Constitution, he thinks you're either a knave, a dupe, or a class which has some appreciation of the evils of government, but either do not see how to get rid of them or do not choose to so far sacrifice their private interest as to give them seriously and earnestly to the work of making a change. So you are a knave, which means what is a knave? A bad person. That a numerous and active class who see in the government an instrument which they can use for their own aggrandizement or wealth.
Checks out.
So, yeah, there's a lot of money to be made if you go along and you know the right people. Take the ticket is the word you use. The dupes would be, let's see, how does he describe them?
Conservatives?
A large class, no doubt, each of whom, because he is allowed one voice out of millions in deciding what he may do with his own person and his own property, and because he's permitted to have the same voice in robbing, enslaving, and murdering others that others have in robbing, enslaving, and murdering himself, is stupid enough to imagine that he is a free man, a sovereign, that this is a free government, a government of equal rights, the best government on earth, and such like absurdities. So the dupes would be, the internet calls them now midwits, you know, IQ from 95 to 105, who are not as smart as they think they are, and say, yeah, it's a free country. After all, this is America. And then the third class, you recognize it, but you haven't figured out what to do about it.
Yeah, I think that's right. There are people that are knaves, don't know what they're messing with, or are wide-eyed about it, but helpless. I think that's right.
Yeah, it's a hard book.